Opponents say he's playing the word game with Americans on what's actually happening in Afghanistan.
I don't know why any American, to an extent, would want to stay in Afghanistan at this point for what's coming under Taliban rule. But I imagine there's a large amount of folks, in the countryside. Kabul is a city of 4 million people.
Biden has been working to reassure Americans with his communications that his administration is handling Afghanistan well.
Let's assume the Afghan National Force had continued to fight and they were surrounding Kabul. Be a very different story.
But his critics tell us he will not be able to explain it away to many Americans.
Well, I think one of the things is going to be what happens in the near and long term in Afghanistan. And so he's going to, he says the buck stops with him, but he's going to own what this withdrawal has done. And the shoddiness of it is going to lead likely to what's happening on the ground, where we've seen not just the Taliban takeover, but you've got terrorist elements that are flooding back into Afghanistan.
Hospitality giant.
He's coming to see you, Joe. He's coming to see you.
5% say no. There is still time to vote. Go to fox5atlanta.com/poll, and we'll bring you new results in our next hour. But Republicans say it's too expensive. Fox News correspondent Lauren Blanchard has more from Capitol Hill.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 212. The resolution is adopted.
The House narrowly approved the Democrats' plan to draft a $3.5 trillion bill with social priorities like child care, Medicare expansion, and climate crisis funding.
We're a step closer to truly investing in the American people.
President Biden began his remarks on Afghanistan Tuesday, first praising Speaker Nancy Pelosi for bringing together House Democrats.
It was a team effort for us to win the vote.
Moderates were concerned the Senate's bipartisan $1 trillion infrastructure bill was being shelved. Speaker Pelosi has committed to voting on the traditional infrastructure package by September 27th and passing both bills by October 1st.
The steam that was in our caucus was to get this done. For the president, for the American people.
But Republicans are angry over the combined price tag of the bills and that Congress and the president aren't fully focused on Afghanistan.
He was wasting precious time this week, burning the phones up, pressuring Democrats to vote for a $5 trillion spending bill and tax bill. That's what he was wasting time on.
Speaker Pelosi wants lawmakers to figure out how to pay for the $3.5 trillion bill and noted whatever they pass has to fit within the rules of the Senate. On Capitol Hill, Lauren Blanchard, Fox News.
Working class. Now Nancy Pelosi and her liberal allies are pushing new tax hikes, trillions in more spending, and another socialist health care plan to control what medicines you can get. A socialist.
And provided specific instructions on how to get to the airport safely. We'll update you regularly on our progress in getting these 500 American citizens out of Afghanistan.
Now, President, its military involvement in Afghanistan by August 31st. So we expect to see or hear about U.S. military troops and resources pulling out in less than a week. Live in New Jersey, Katie Byrne, Fox 5 News.
All right, Katie, thanks. As the situation...
We need to have a mission focused on getting everybody out, and when everybody's out, then the mission's complete.
He has to, as I say, weigh the equities of the danger versus the advantage, and I trust his judgment.
Tuesday, two lawmakers, Congressman Seth Moulton, a Democrat, and Peter Meyer, a Republican, made an unauthorized trip to Kabul, aimed at pressuring the president to extend the deadline. But after talking with commanders and observing evacuations at the airport, the two concluded in a joint statement, "We won't get everyone out on time, even by September 11. Others agree.
We are on the cusp of having the biggest mass hostage situation in American history. It's going to make 1979 in Tehran look like a sleepover.
In a Dear Colleague letter, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi urged lawmakers to avoid the region, saying unnecessary trips divert resources from the current mission.
This is deadly serious. We do not want members to go.
With the collapse of Kabul, roughly $6 billion in defense spending once dedicated to Afghanistan is now considered up for grabs, although some of it is expected to go to counterterrorism. In Washington, Lauren Blanchard, Fox News.
And that's the country, saying they've been in contact with about a third of them. Tonight, the race to get them out and the timeline for U.S. troops. The growing concern over ISIS, the terror threat on the ground there. And what happens after President Biden number of evacuees get to that airport. The Secretary of State saying the U.S. remains very concerned about the ISIS terror threat on the ground, a sworn enemy of the Taliban too. And that promise from the Secretary of State after the August 31st deadline that this effort to help Americans and Afghans will continue. But as I asked, what will it look like? Here's our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, Martha Raddatz, leading us off tonight.
Tonight, the State Department warning that at least 500 and as many as 1,500 Americans may still need to be evacuated from Afghanistan, and that the U.S. won't be leaving anyone behind.
Let me be crystal clear about this. There is no deadline on our work to help any remaining American citizens who decide they want to leave to do so, along with the many Afghans who have stood by us over these many years.
4,500 Americans have already been airlifted out, some 500 just today. President Biden set August 31st as the deadline for the evacuation, a date the Taliban called a red line for the U.S. getting out of Afghanistan entirely. The president says we'll meet the deadline, but for any left behind,
that effort will continue every day past August 31st. The Taliban have made public and private commitments to provide and permit safe passage for Americans, for third country nationals, and Afghans at risk going forward past August 31st.
There are concerns the longer the U.S. stays, the higher the risk at the airport. And Marines in the most dangerous part of Afghanistan, Helmand Province. When we met him in Kabul in June, he already knew he was a marked man.
I know that I will be killed by the Taliban.
When the Taliban seized Kabul, Abdul, his wife, and 3 daughters went into hiding, moving from house to house, the Taliban right behind them. ABC's Stephanie Ramos taking his case to President Biden.
My colleague Martha Raddatz interviewed Abdul, an interpreter who was on the front lines with U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Overnight, we received a photo of Taliban militants coming to the door of his home, literally hunting him down. Thankfully, he was able to escape, but he is obviously still in mortal danger. What would be your message to Abdul, his wife, and his 3 young daughters?
We want you to be able to get to the airport. Contact us. We'll see whatever we can do to get you there.
On that same day, we got a message from Abdul saying he did his job with honesty and pride, but that Americans had left us to people who are not human and will cut off our heads in front of our families. For days, ABC News and others in and out of government worked tirelessly to help, and now
he's coming to see you, Joe. He's coming to see you.
And Russ, people who live here along the southern border question whether this policy will actually help the border crisis or make it worse. This summer, we've been seeing immigrants cross the border at record numbers, and lawmakers hope that bringing this policy back will cut down on that. But Texas police say it's not that simple. Runners crossing the Texas border in large groups, completely avoiding Border Patrol. Fox News caught these immigrants on camera this week crossing illegally. And Texas police fear now that the Remain in Mexico policy is back in place, it's only going to get worse.
We're not going to have the luxury of these people surrendering to us to allow us to help them. Now we're going to have to be pursuing them, which is going to turn into a more dangerous situation.
Sergeant Joel Villarreal with the La Jolla Police Department showed us these photos. He says these are families who called 911 as they got near the border to turn themselves in. At the time, they did not have to worry about being sent to a Mexico refugee camp. Police saw numbers spike over the weekend before the Supreme Court's decision.
This weekend was very chaotic. We had, in less than an hour, about 200 people or more crossing through our area.
You have to understand that while folks are awaiting in Mexico, there are thousands of persons who are not naturally from Mexico.
Alejandro San Miguel is a Texas immigration attorney. He calls the Mexico refugee camps inhumane.
There's no access to, reasonable medical resources. There's no access to police. So these camps basically become a ghetto type-ish.
Before many of the refugee camps were shut down earlier this year, the Human Rights First organization reported over 1,500 cases of murder, rape, torture, and kidnapping testing at these sites. The Department of Homeland Security also disagreeing with the decision to reinstate the policy, but says it will comply with the order as the appeals process continues.
It goes against the whole nature and purpose of requesting asylum in the United States.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott calls the Supreme Court decision a major victory for the state and the safety of those who live along the border. Human rights groups, though, say it's a major loss for the Biden White House. In Mission, Texas, Rebecca Castor, Fox 5.
He was driving. They say the deputy had not even turned on his blue lights and siren at this point.
He got word that there was a stolen Camry on the interstate. When he comes close to this Camry, before he even activates his lights and siren, it takes off speeds excess of 100 miles an hour.
The chase only lasted a few minutes. Deputies decided to use the pit maneuver because of Baldwin's speed and the road conditions. Deputies took Aaliyah Baldwin into custody. She's been charged with theft by receiving stolen property, fleeing, and attempting to elude police. Also, driving without a license. That's right. Deputies say she did not have a license to drive. This is the second time in the past month that a female driver has led deputies.
For firefighters, temperatures set to hit the triple digits again here this weekend.
Matt Gutman in California. Matt, thank you. We're also following that heat that Matt spoke of, this heat wave building across much of the country. Heat alerts tonight, in fact, in 29 states from California all the way to the Northeast. Let's get right to senior meteorologist Rob Marciano tracking this for us tonight. Hey, Rob.
I had an easier time and less of a wait getting through the Social Security and getting what I needed mailed to me versus getting an appointment for whichever one of the two, well, both of them, I guess, that doctor wants me to do. Oh, God. Inner office computers don't talk to each other. What's wrong with these folks?